All right, today we're going over more operations with matrices. We're looking at matrix multiplication, which I need you to realize is quite different than adding and subtracting. That should have been super easy breezy. Matrix multiplication does not work that way. This is where it gets a little bit weird. If you remember when we multiplied vectors, when we did the dot product, they also behaved weird, so it's in the same kind of realm of things. This is probably slightly more complicated, but you guys can get this. It's just a bunch of multiplying and adding. You just have to do it in the right way. So first rule is that the dimensions have to line up this way when you're doing multiplication. The number of columns in the first matrix has to match the number of rows in the second matrix. So what that means, what we're going to do is we're going to write out the dimensions each time. And what that means is these numbers, they need to match. That's the inside numbers, because that's your column from your first and your row from your second. Those need to match. And then what happens is if we look at the outside numbers are actually going to tell you the size of the answer. That'll be the dimension of the answer. So in this particular example, the answer is going to end up being m by p sized. So the first thing we're looking at is just deciding if we can multiply given just the dimensions, and if so, what size the answer would be. So looking at number 1, the first thing we check is that these inside ones have to match. If they match, then the outside ones tell me how big the answer would be. The answer would be a 2 by 4. And then in number 2, the inside ones do not match, so this is going to be undefined. This will not work. And then take a look at the last one. These inside ones work, they match, so the answer is going to be 5 by 1. Okay, so that's just understanding what size the answer will be, which will help us to set up what the answer has to look like. Now, how do you actually multiply them? It'd be super nice if we just had to do A times E like we did before, but that's not how this works. So that's the first thing I need you to get in your head, is it doesn't work that way. How it does work is you actually have to do a whole row from the first one times a whole column from the second one. So we're doing row times column, kind of just like when we do dimension, but that's the setup for how you're going to multiply these. So let's just dial it back for a second. This guy was 2 by 2. This guy was 2 by 2. So I already have set up over here that the answer would also be 2 by 2. So to get the first answer blank, since it's in the first row, first column, this guy right here is in the first row, first column, we're going to do the first row times the first column. So it's going to be A, E, those are going to go together. Then you're going to move. So I already used A and E, then we're going to move on to the next elements. We're going to go to B and G, and we're going to multiply those, and they will add on to A times E. So this is usually a little bit easier if I can stand in front of the class and point to things and line things up. So I need you to realize this is very visual. You need to look carefully at what's going on here. So now if we go to this next answer blank, that is in the first row still. So we're going to do the first row from the first one, and it's in the second column. So we're going to take the second column this time, and again you're going to do the first elements together, A times F. Then you have to move for both of them. So I'm going to move on to B, and I'm going to move on to H, and that's going to be plus B times H. Okay, so hopefully you're kind of starting to catch on here. And this next answer blank, this is in the second row, just so you see this written out, first column. So that tells you you now have to move on to the second row and multiply it by the first column to get what's going to go in that spot. So that's going to be C times E plus, we're going to move on to the next letters, D times G. And then the last one, we're doing the second row. This is in the second row, second column. So we're doing the second row times the second column. It's C times F plus D times H. Okay? So that's the gist of it. I'm going to again write out, it's a whole row times a whole column, row times column. And the one other thing I need to talk about is order. Think about what would happen if we switch the order of these two things. If we switch the order, we actually end up with a completely different answer. So what I need you to be aware of is that matrix multiplication is not commutative, which means we can't change the order. Okay? So let's look at number 1 with some actual numbers in it and see if we can get through this together. So first thing I'm going to write out are the dimensions. The dimensions of the first one are 2 by 2. The dimensions of the second one are also 2 by 2, which means my answer setup. This is how I always do this. I'm going to set up 2 by 2, which means I need to put 2 rows and 2 columns. Okay? And now we can start matching. So I'm going to match for the first answer blank, it's first row with first column. Again, it's always going across for that first matrix, and it's always going down for that second matrix. So that's going to be -3 times -5, which is 15. Plus, then we're going to move -1 times 3 is -3. And now for the next one in the first row, that's in the first row and it's in the second column. So I'm going to plug in -3 times 2 is -6. -1 times 1 is -1, so that's going to be plus -1. And then we're going to move to the second row of things for my answer, which means I need to use the second row. And then we're going to do the one in the first column. So that's going to be -10. And then we move on to the next numbers, 4 and 3 together make 12. And then we're looking at the last row, last column. 2 and 2 make 4. And then we're moving on to the 4 and 1, make 4 as well. And then all you've got to do to get your answer is simplify this down. So if I simplify that, I'm going to get 12, -7, +2, and 8. And that is my answer. Okay? So now we're going to start to mess with different sizes. So it's really important for the rest of these that you always write the dimensions first. So the first one is 2 by 2. And now the next run, make sure you do rows first. This has 2 rows and 1 column, which means my answer is going to be a 2 by 1 matrix. So that's what I need to set up right now, is I need to set up a 2 by 1 matrix, which is going to look like that second matrix. You're going to have 2 rows but only 1 column. So we're going to set that up right away. And then we look at the first blank is first row times first column. So that's going to be 10 for the first number, and then we move 3 times -3 to get the next number. We get -9. -9. And then to get the next one, it's the bottom row, it's in the second row, times the first column. -8 plus -1 times -3 is +3. And we just simplify, we get 1 and -5. And that's your answer. All right, let's try a couple more. So looking at number 6, this has 1 row and 3 columns. And then this one has 3 rows and 1 column, which means my answer is going to be a 1 by 1 matrix. So that's just actually going to be 1 row, 1 column, which makes sense because if I go to multiply, I only have this 1 row to multiply by this 1 column. So we're just going to match these up. First number with first number, so -4 with 2 gives me -8. Then the 1 is going to go with the -5, that gives me -5. And the 3 is going to go with the 1, that'll give me 3. And then we just have to simplify that down to get one answer. That's all I want for this one since it's a 1 by 1. So that's just going to be -10 in the brackets to make it look like a matrix still, but you just get that one answer. All right, number 7 at first glance looks just fine. But if we write out the dimensions here, this is a 3 by 2, 3 rows, 2 columns, and this is also 3 by 2. So if I look here, these middle ones do not match, which means this cannot multiply. This is undefined. Even if you tried to multiply it before you wrote out the dimensions to realize it doesn't work, this doesn't have enough elements to match up with that. The rows only have 2 and the columns have 3, so they don't match, which is why those inside numbers have to match. Those cannot be multiplied together. All right, looking at number 8, this one is 3 by 2. This one's 2 by 2. This time those inside ones do match, so I'm looking at those outside ones. My size of my answer is going to be a 3 by 2, so it's going to look just like that first matrix. Probably need more space. 3 by 2, so 3 rows and 2 columns. So then we're just doing first row times first column to get the first answer. That's going to be 12 plus 1. Then we're going to do first row times second one to get the second one in the first row. That's going to be negative 20 plus 2. And then we're going to do second row times first one. That's negative 9 plus, be careful here, 0 times 1 is 0. I see that mistake a lot. And then we'll do this guy times this guy. That's 15 plus 0. And now we're on to the last row. Last row times first column. That's 6 plus negative 2. And then I need one more color here. Last row, last column, we got negative 10 and negative 4. And then we just simplify this down. That's going to be 13, negative 18, negative 9, 15, 4, negative 14. And there's your answer. All right, and then the last one, number 9, we have a 1 by 2 times a 2 by 2. So this one will work because the inside numbers match, which means I'm looking at those outside numbers. I know it's going to be a 1 by 2, which is the same size as the first one. So we're going to do, to get the first element, it's first row times first column. That's negative 12 plus negative 15. And then we do first row times second column. That's positive 4 plus 40. We get an answer of negative 27 and 44. Okay. So hopefully this makes sense, even though I'm not standing, pointing, and jumping around like I would normally be in class. But there are a couple problems for you to try on ClassKick. Please try those. And then you have another shorter homework assignment just to make sure that you understand the multiplication.